Number Reaple, what my son's future father-in-law didn't know, when he looked me up and down at that country club dinner and said, "So you're the one who fixes plumbing for a living," was that his family's estate had been financed through a subsidiary of my holding company for the past 11 years. He thought he was talking to a repairman. He was talking to the man who held the paper on everything he owned. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old. I came to this country from Seoul with my mother when I was 9, speaking exactly 4 words of English: yes, no, please, and thank you. We settled in Akron, Ohio, not because it was glamorous, but because my mother's cousin had a spare room and a kind heart. My mother cleaned houses during the day and took English classes at the community center 3 nights a week. She never complained once. She used to tell me, in Korean, that dignity was the one thing nobody could take from you unless you handed it to them yourself. I have tried to live by that every single day of my life. I built my first real business at 31, a plumbing and HVAC company called Cho Mechanical. I started with 1 truck, 1 helper, and a used set of pipe wrenches I bought at an estate sale for $40. I wore a uniform with my name on the chest. I crawled under houses in January. I worked 16-hour days. By the time I was 45, Cho Mechanical had 87 employees and contracts with 3 hospital systems and a major university across northeastern Ohio. But I didn't stop there. I reinvested everything. I bought the building my office was in, then the building next to it. I started a property management company, then a small commercial lending operation, mostly serving small business owners, immigrants, minorities, people the big banks turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with creditworthiness. I called it Cornerstone Capital Group. I kept my name off the public-facing materials deliberately. I'd learned early that certain doors opened faster when people didn't know who was walking through them. My son, Daniel, is 34. He's a good man. Quiet like me, careful with his words, loyal to the people he loves. He's a structural engineer, spent 6 years getting his degrees, works for a firm in Columbus. He called me 2 years ago, voice lighter than I'd heard it in years, and told me he'd met someone. Her name was Claire. He said she was brilliant and funny, and that she made him want to be better. That was enough for me. I met Claire 3 months into the relationship. She drove up to Akron with Daniel on a Sunday, and we had lunch at my kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just the Korean short ribs my mother taught me to make. Claire ate 2 full plates and asked for the recipe. I liked her immediately. She was genuine in a way that's hard to fake. She looked Daniel in the eye when she talked to him. She asked me real questions about my life, not polite ones. I thought, this woman loves my son. Her family was a different matter. Claire's father is Richard Harmon. The Harmons are what people in certain Ohio circles call old money. Though if you trace it back far enough, it's really just grandfather's money that nobody's had the nerve to spend down completely. Richard owns a chain of regional insurance agencies, Harmon and Associates, and sits on the boards of 2 local charities and a country club in Westerville. He drives a car that costs more than most people's annual salary and wears it the way some men wear a crown. I first encountered Richard at what Claire described as a casual family dinner, which turned out to be a catered event at the Harmon family home, a 6-bedroom colonial on 3 acres, with a woman who circulated through the room filling wine glasses before they were half empty. Claire's mother, Patricia, greeted me at the door with a smile so practiced it had probably been used on 1,000 people she didn't care about. She said, "Oh, how wonderful," when Daniel introduced me, and then looked over my shoulder for the next guest. Richard shook my hand once, briefly, and then proceeded to not speak to me for the first 40 minutes of the evening. I stood near the fireplace with a glass of water. I don't drink, and watched him work the room. He was good at it. Commanding. The kind of man who laughs loudly so everyone knows he's enjoying himself. When he finally made his way to me, it was with 2 of his friends from the club flanking him. He looks at me with the expression of a man who has decided what something is before he's examined it. "Walter, right?" he said. "Claire tells me you're in the trades." I told him I'd started in plumbing, yes. "Good, honest work," he said, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. His friend, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who'd been introduced to me as being in development, which apparently meant he bought land and put parking structures on it, laughed a little. "Essential services," Gerald said with a smirk. I smiled. Absolutely, I said. I did not explain further. I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people who underestimate you is let them keep doing it. Over the following months, Richard made a point of demonstrating, at every opportunity, where he believed I stood relative to him. At Daniel and Claire's engagement party, held, of course, at the country club, he introduced me to his colleagues as Claire's future father-in-law, the plumber. Not Walter Cho, not Daniel's father. The plumber. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten when he heard it. I put my hand briefly on my son's arm and shook my head slightly. Not yet. Patricia was subtler, but no less consistent. She had a habit of praising Claire's achievements. Her MBA, her marketing director title, her eye for the finer things. And then looking at me as though she expected me to feel the gap between Claire's world and whatever world she imagined I came from. She once asked me, at a brunch the four of them hosted, whether Daniel had considered upgrading to a firmer in a bigger market, because surely, with Claire's connections, he could do better than a mid-sized Columbus firm. Daniel, to his great credit, said evenly that he was exactly where he wanted to be. Claire looked mortified. I said nothing. The moment that changed things came 8 months before the wedding. Richard called Daniel directly, not me, Daniel, and told him that given the significant difference in family standing, the Harmons felt it was only appropriate that my side of the family contribute $50,000 toward the wedding costs. He framed it as an opportunity for me to demonstrate that I could participate meaningfully in the event. He said the venue alone would cost $300,000, and that the Harmons had already committed to the majority of it, but that it was important for both families to have skin in the game. He actually used that phrase. Skin in the game. Daniel called me that evening. His voice was controlled, but I could hear what was underneath it. Dad, I need to tell you what Claire's father just said to me. He told me everything. When he finished, there was a silence. What do you want to do? I asked him. I want to marry Claire, he said, but I won't ask you to. I'm not talking about the money, I said. I'm asking what you want to do. Another silence. I want him to understand that he doesn't get to treat you the way he's been treating you. Okay, I said. Let me handle it. I want to be precise here, because I think precision matters when you're talking about something like this. I did not act out of anger. Anger is loud and imprecise, and it makes you do things you have to apologize for later. What I felt was something quieter, a kind of clarity. Richard Harmon had decided who I was, based on a uniform I stopped wearing 20 years ago. He had spent 8 months communicating to me, my son, and anyone within earshot that I was less than him. And now he had sent my son a bill for the privilege of being allowed to join his family. I spent 2 days doing nothing, except thinking and making a few phone calls to people I trusted. Then I made an appointment. The Harmon family estate, the colonial on 3 acres, had been refinanced in 2019 through a regional lending intermediary. That intermediary had been acquired by Cornerstone Capital Group in 2021. The Harmon's mortgage, along with several other Harmon-adjacent financial instruments, including a business line of credit used by Harmon and Associates, had been sitting in my portfolio for going on 3 years. I had known this since the acquisition. It had been entirely irrelevant to me until Richard made it relevant. Harmon and Associates also leased their primary office space, a suite in a Westerville office building, from a property management company. That property management company was a subsidiary of a real estate trust. That trust was managed by Cornerstone Capital Group. Richard Harmon had been, in a very specific financial sense, my tenant for 3 years. He had written checks, indirectly, to a company I owned. He had called me a plumber while sitting in a building I controlled. I did not go to Richard directly. I called Claire first. I want to be clear about this because it matters to me. Claire deserved to know what was happening before it happened. She was going to marry my son. She was not responsible for her father's behavior, and she had shown consistently that she was embarrassed by it. I met her for coffee at a place near her office in Columbus on a Tuesday morning. I told her that I was going to respond to her father's demand, and that the response was going to be significant, and that I wanted her to understand what was coming before it arrived. I told her I was not doing this to hurt her or to damage her relationship with her parents, but that I was not willing to allow her father to continue treating my son and me the way he had been. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you known about the mortgage?" "Since the acquisition," I said. 3 years. She looked at me steadily. "You never said anything." It wasn't relevant. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He's going to be humiliated." "He's been humiliating my son for 8 months," I said. "I'm not trying to destroy your family, Claire, but I need him to understand who he's been speaking to. And more importantly, I need him to understand how to speak to Daniel." She was quiet again. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," I said. "I just needed you to know." She nodded slowly. As I stood up to leave, she said, "Mr. Cho, Walter, for what it's worth, I've known for a while that you were more than what my father decided you were. I just didn't know the details." She paused. "I'm sorry it took this long for someone to show him." I called Richard's office the following day and asked for a meeting. His assistant, a young woman who sounded like she'd been trained to project-controlled skepticism toward unknown callers, asked what the meeting was regarding. I told her it was regarding the Westerville property lease and several related financial matters. I gave her my name and the name of the company, Cornerstone Capital Group. There was a brief pause. Then she said she'd check with Mr. Harmon and call me back. Richard called me himself, 40 minutes later. His voice was cautious in a way I hadn't heard before. "Walter," he said, "I wasn't aware you had a connection to Cornerstone." "I own it," I said pleasantly. I thought it might be useful for us to sit down. We met at his office the following Thursday. He had a lawyer with him, a man named Sutter, silver-haired, careful-eyed, who shook my hand with the practiced firmness of someone who spent most of his working life preparing for adversarial situations. I had my own attorney, a woman named Grace Kim, who had worked with Cornerstone for 12 years, and who has forgotten more about commercial lending law than most people will ever know. Richard was composed when we sat down. He'd had a week to think. He had probably done some research, talked to some people, begun to understand the geography of what he'd been walking through without a map, but I don't think he had fully grasped it yet, because when I opened the meeting, he said, "I'm sure we can clear up any confusion about the demand I made to Daniel." It was meant in the spirit of collaboration, not, "Richard," I said. "I'm not here about the $50,000. He stopped. I placed a folder on the table, prepared by Grace, organized precisely. Cornerstone Capital Group currently holds the primary mortgage on your residential property, the business line of credit for Harmon and Associates, and the commercial lease for your Westerville offices. I've owned these instruments for 3 years. I let that sit for a moment. I want you to understand that I have never taken any action related to any of these instruments based on anything other than the terms of the agreements you signed. I have been, in every relevant sense, a silent and entirely professional counterparty." Richard was very still. "I'm not here to threaten you," I continued. "I want to be extremely clear about that. What I am here to do is have a direct conversation that I think we should have had a long time ago. You have spent the better part of a year treating me as someone beneath your consideration. You've done it in front of my son, in front of your daughter, and in front of people who were watching to see how you behaved. You called my son with a financial demand framed as a condition of your family's acceptance of him. I think you did those things because you looked at me and saw a uniform, and you made a decision." I paused. "I'd like you to revisit that decision." Sutter leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mywowert," slightly, "Cho, if this is intended as financial leverage—" "If I intended financial leverage," I said mildly, "I wouldn't have brought a folder and an attorney. I would have sent a letter." I looked at Richard. "I'm speaking to you as the father of your daughter's future husband. I'm asking you to treat my son with the respect he has more than earned. I'm asking you to treat me with common courtesy. Those are the only things I'm asking for." The silence in that room was a specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone realizes they have been operating with a map of a territory that turned out to be completely wrong. Richard looked at the folder. He looked at Grace. He looked at me. Some men, in that moment, would have gotten angry. would have reached for some remaining high ground, some procedural objection, some face-saving maneuver. Richard was smart enough to know there wasn't one. Whatever ground he thought he'd been standing on had turned out to belong to someone else. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. His voice was different, flatter, realer. "You owe Daniel one," I said. "I'm tougher than he is." Something crossed his face at that. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Something like recognition. The engagement dinner that Claire and Daniel hosted 3 weeks later at a restaurant in Columbus that Daniel had chosen, not the country club, was the first time Richard Harmon looked at me when he spoke to me. He used my name. He asked about Cornerstone. He asked about the early years of Cho Mechanical, and the questions were genuine. Not the studied graciousness of a man performing interest, but the slightly uncomfortable curiosity of a man who has realized he missed something important. Patricia was quieter than usual. I did not press any advantage. I ate my dinner. I talked to my son. I watched Claire laugh at something her mother said, and I thought about my own mother in Akron, taking English classes 3 nights a week at the end of the evening, as coats were being collected and Daniel was settling the check over Richard's protest. Richard found a moment to stand next to me near the door. "Claire told me," he said, "that you came to her first, before any of this." "She was going to be affected by it," I said. "She deserved to know." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing business for 30 years, he said. "I've been in rooms with a lot of people. I've made judgments about people." He paused. "I was wrong about you from the beginning, and I think I knew it earlier than I was willing to admit." He extended his hand. "I'm sorry, Walter." I shook it. "One thing," I said. "When Daniel and Claire have children, and they will, those kids are going to know both their grandfathers. I'd like them to know you as someone worth knowing, not for my benefit, for theirs." I looked at him steadily. "That's entirely up to you." He nodded once, firmly. The way men of his generation signal that they understand something to be a commitment. The wedding was in October. Small. Daniel and Claire had decided months earlier they didn't want the $300,000 production. 60 people, a vineyard outside Columbus, late afternoon light coming sideways through the trees. Claire wore her grandmother's earrings. Daniel cried during the vows, which he had written himself and which were quiet and precise and completely him. Richard gave a toast at the reception. He said that he had learned more about what it meant to build something from his daughter's father-in-law than he had from most people he'd met in business. He said that he hoped Daniel had inherited at least half of my stubbornness. He said that the Harmon family was grateful to have the Cho family. He did not look away when he said it. I gave my own toast after his. I kept it short. I thanked Claire for loving my son the way she does. I told Daniel that his grandmother, my mother, who passed 6 years ago, would have made him short ribs and cried happy tears, and told him in Korean that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you unless you handed it to them yourself. Then I sat down and I watched my son dance with his wife, and I thought about one truck and one helper and a set of pipe wrenches that cost $40, and all the distance between that morning and this one. Some distances, it turns out, are worth every single step,